Hello, everybody, and welcome to Roger's Real-Time Talkshow event. I'm here with Mark Edworthy, and today I wanted to, first let Mark say hi. Hello, Mark.
Hi, hi.
With that being done, today I wanted to get onto part six of the conversation that I've been having, and that concerns. I've been saying that I wanted to do this, and last week I kind of went into it a little bit with statutory law when it talks about the person, and we were having a conversation of what defines a person, and that has to do with natural law and positivism. I wanted to go over natural law because, first of all, before we get into this, Mark, I want to be kind of casual and laid back on it, okay? Because a lot of this I know is real complicated, and
Mm,
people if people aren't into political history, they really aren't going to comprehend what's being said. So I'm not going to be throwing all these historical, terms out there and stuff like that. I'll try to keep it as common language as possible instead of trying to
mm,
do all that. So, um, now natural law. Before I said that it's pretty evil, to be honest with you. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the stuff that comes out of natural law is good. Like, everybody knows about constitutional law and they know about John Locke, okay? But they don't understand there were more players that were involved with natural law than just John Locke and the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. There was more that was involved, like natural law actually started before all that happened. And John Locke was talking about it. Jean Jacques Rousseau was talking about it, and there were a few other people. Now, from everything that I've found out and what I was doing my research with, John Jacques Rousseau was actually the person who started the whole socialist movement. Okay, he was against John Locke on a lot of his philosophies, and one of the biggest things that he was against was private property. He didn't think that we should have private property. He felt that it should be run by the state, and that man shouldn't have it. You know what I mean? He didn't feel that we should have a king and a queen, but he didn't think that the common person should own property. So that was kind of interesting when it comes to that. Now that Charles Louis second dot Montesquieu, uh,
mm.
he's the one that you were talking about, and he argued that natural laws were pre-social and superior to those of religion and the state. He also believed that uh, it's kind of hard to explain. He believed that frickin' things came, that natural law came from, the basic instincts of man. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm.
so we're talking about mob rule and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Things of that nature. That was his
Sanity, yeah.
that was his take on the whole thing about natural law. So, like, whenever frickin' somebody got murdered in a neighborhood, you know what I mean? Back in old England, if somebody seen the murderer, they would scream out, "Murderer, murderer," and run down the street. And next thing you know, 10 people were screaming, "Murderer, murderer." And all of a sudden, a mob was formed and people were hunting this murderer down, you know what I mean? And that was kind of what his argument was about natural law. So, that's kind of the best best way I could answer it with him, because I know you asked about him before the stream started, so I figured I'd bring it up and kind of try to explain it without being too make it as basic as I possibly can. So now with Rousseau, he postulated a savage who was virtuous in isolation and actuated by two principles. That's prior to reason, and that was self-preservation and compulsion and compassion. Innate repugnant to the suffering of others. Now, repugnant, that's where they don't feel any feelings towards the suffering of others, isn't it? Basically, being repugnant.
A more sort of disgust of feelings,
Yeah.
disgust of a item, yeah.
Suffering. They didn't care about the suffering of others, basically. And, that's...
Oh, it's not caring, it's more a dislike rather than caring.
Repugnant. Okay, it was innate repugnant to the suffering of others. So they disliked the suffering of others, basically. It was see, they got those big fancy words. So with me though, you read that and you think, yeah, that's great and everything, that people have a dislike when it comes to the suffering of others, but what he was really putting together there wasn't that. He was actually trying to freaking make it to where freaking, like, me and you as individuals had to freaking worry more about the suffering of other people than freaking our own rights. You know what I'm saying? And for me, even that would sound okay in writing until it's put into practical use. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's real easy to freaking say that you freaking don't like the suffering of other people around you, but why should I have to freaking live according to a law that dictates I need to be responsible for the suffering of other people? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is it that I have to freaking be freaking indebted to worrying about what other people are going through? You know what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden I'm becoming a part of this social contract, you know what I mean? And that's what he was trying to put together, was a social contract to where you're indebted and I'm indebted and responsible for the welfare of everybody else, you know. And that's where things started getting shaky, you know. Now, the individual all of a sudden becomes second place to freaking the group conscious. You know what I mean? So you start hearing people talk about according to your own conscience. Okay, that's what freedom is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to have freedom according to your own consciousness, according to Locke. And that's what made it into the Declaration of Independence here in the United States. But then again, there's another flip side to that, you know what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden, frickin', you got these outside forces that can frickin' hold you and put you in jail because you gave them consent according to your own conscience. You know what I mean? So now you can be jailed because frickin' you've given consent to the government to frickin' do it, you know? So, and that right there is kind of tricky too when it comes to that whole concept, because what's going on with that government. Is that government actually, you know, is it a fair government, or is it a corrupt government that's in charge of your freaking freedom? You know what I mean? Basically, because they can arrest you at any time for anything because you've given consent to them.
Mm.
You know, so
There's also the concept of if you gone down the sort of group of the consciousness, then there's the idea of group consciousness and who determines that.
mm-hmm.
So does do you, as a collective, as a small neighborhood, decide on that, or do external influences such as governments, media, those other and charitable institutions, well, large multinational charitable institutions decide on that?
Right. And see, sovereignty is what, or the sovereign is the term they use for it. It was all of us as a collection, a collective. Like even in England, you guys have a sovereign. You know what I mean? A sovereignty,
Mm.
and that's everybody that's in your country that votes and freaking are able to, you know, actually.
Yeah.
Well,
Technically, sovereignty, as far as I can see, in relation to the UK, is sovereignty of the monarch. So we are, whilst we are citizens of the country, we are still, I want to say serfs, but that's
you're,
probably
you're slaves to the monarchy. You're slaves.
slaves a little bit.
Slaves, I tell you.
Serfs. I'll go with serfs, even though that's still a little bit too.
That's
Yeah.
pretty much what it says. I mean, like, you know, you know where the term slave came from, right? It came from Slavs, the Slavic.
Yeah, yeah.
They were the first slaves to frickin' be forced into slavery, according to the name, and that's where it derived from, Slav, slave.
Mm, mm,
And serfs, same area, same.
mm.
I guess Russia's the one that came up with the term serf, didn't they?
I've seen, well, based on the Slavic principle. Yeah, I presume so. I haven't. I did do some entomology on that some time ago, but several years ago, so I can't remember. But I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so you have, in order for you to be a part of the sovereignty, to be, you have to give, or you have to be under the Queen's rule, basically.
Hawkins in
Oh
current
yeah, I keep
situation.
forgetting.
Yeah.
You guys have a king now. I'm sorry. It's so
Mm.
hard to remember that freaking the Queen passed away. You know what I mean? Just it's
Yeah.
we,
It's only what a year ago now.
yeah. Doesn't even seem like it.
Yeah.
Like, can you
Just
imagine?
like
I mean, think about it. Charles is
Mm.
freaking king, dude. Who would have ever imagined Charles being king?
I could see it. There's been this argument about Charles not being or or peerage missing him not being king. This has been an ongoing argument for as long as I can remember, since the 90s or something, and I've always thought that it would be,
Yeah.
personally.
Robot says he wants to get in on the chat. You want to
Yeah,
let him in?
yeah.
Click on the link.
It's right. Access. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that. Yeah, I told him to go ahead and click on the link, so he should. He
Yeah,
might be
sure.
coming in. So this isn't like some weird setup to where like you've got three different kinds of citizens in like England deal where freaking ones that don't support the Queen aren't actually a part of the sovereign and people.
No, as far as um that issue is concerned, is we are just sovereigns. Everybody's all United Kingdom and Commonwealth citizens are sovereigns of the monarch, the
Yeah,
UK
yeah,
British monarch.
and see that would make sense too because like after Cromwell, oh there he is. After Cromwell was freaking lost his power, that's when they
Hey
went.
guys.
You guys went back to kings and queens. Hey
Mm.
robot, can you hear us?
I
Yeah, I just was listening to you guys. I couldn't not chip in on this whole sovereignty issue.
Uh huh.
Because, like, a lot of this modern day view on it came from the divine right of kings in uh, British. Let me look it up. Divine right of kings. So, like, they believe that God gave them the right to rule over the people, right?
Right.
mm,
And therefore, the king is the sovereign, or the monarch is the sovereign. And
mm.
I actually think this whole thing goes way back into the ancient history of this whole concept of, like, you know, these sky gods that give powers to the gods or the pharaohs or the emperors or whatever. And this is, like, a common theme all over the world, right?
Yeah, it goes through
Um,
history.
There was a there was a slight difference in this in the UK because of the Reformation. The monarch is the head of the Church
Right.
of England, the Anglican Church. Whereas in the rest of the world, when it comes to things like Catholics, well, Catholic that's a good example. The Pope is the head, is the divine representative of the God.
the
Now,
king is, or the
now,
In under the Anglican Church, the king is for the UK in British monarchy.
well, this is the same old concept. There's always been the king and the priesthood, right? Even in ancient
Mm.
Egypt, there was the pharaoh and its priesthood,
right.
and it's basically like the ruler that enforces and the priesthood that kind of is meant to be communicating with the gods, right? And
Well,
and advising the king. When
also
the public
in
thinks the king has all the power, but secretly the priesthood always held the power. And
also
sometimes there would
in
be these events of the sacrificial king where the king gets, like, assassinated or killed. But
in
the
ancient
thing,
Egypt, the pharaoh was considered to be a living god themselves.
yes,
Yeah, but
yes,
hold
that's
up.
true.
Let
That's
me
true.
let me also
Reverend,
let me also point something out too. Like, you guys are mostly discussing imperialism. Now, after
Mm.
imperialism's, well, during this time period, freaking the sovereignty was the people who were overthrowing these imperial countries. I believe in Europe there was only like two or three countries that didn't follow the constitutional law. And they stayed empirical. Like I think England was one of them. I don't think they lost monarchy during that time. Wait, yeah, they did. John Locke.
well, what happened with the Knights Templar, right? Isn't that when
Oh
common law
no,
kind of came about?
no, that was like
No,
10,000 A.D.
in in Britain, it's a bit more complicated because you've got things like the Magna Carta,
The Magna Carta, yeah.
and the Bill of Rights, the 1869 Bill of Rights or Act of Rights.
Yeah.
So yeah, this removes certain these things remove certain powers from
The
monarch.
king. Yeah,
The
monarch.
monarch, yeah, it cannot just go out and arrest people just for the sake of arresting people.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, the whole deal on the imperial or imperial the imperial governments is a valid thing too. Like that was going on for
Yeah,
since the beginning of time, really. But
that's right.
you
Well,
know,
it's the empire builders versus the people of freedom, right?
hmm
The liberating people.
now
And
Charles.
yeah, that's been the same story.
Now, Charles Montesquieu, he was the one who argued about the because mob order, because freaking that was one of the conversations he was having, because like society has depended on kings and queens for so long that he felt natural law would result into freaking people resorting to mob rule. You know what I mean? So that was one of his arguments.
Didn't these
Just the,
rebel barons that stood up to King John of England, were they from the Templars? Were they like
no, we
descendants
are
of
talking
Templars?
about Magna Carta
Yeah,
thing.
you're like way back in time, man. We're talking about like
12,
Yeah, 1215, sorry, 1215. Um,
1250,
yeah, we're talking about like
890
17.
ago.
We're talking about like 1700s, 1800s, like around the French and American Revolution.
But as you're saying, these things, like history kind of repeats itself, right? Like it kind of, there's like periods of freedom, then there's periods of control, and then there's periods of freedom and periods of control. And this goes all the way back fucking hundreds of thousands of years probably. But
mm,
I'm just trying to sort of get a footing on like where this stuff kind of came about, these like freedom type movements, these rebellions, and
The
it seems to coincide with periods of when the average people gain knowledge
well, you know
of
about
how things
the
work.
Republic, right? You know about the Roman Republic and
Of the
freaking
US.
no
Oh,
in
oh,
the
yeah.
Roman Republic. Okay, ideas sprung from there. The Greeks had their ideas about democracy, which, by the way, democracy and the Republic are two separate things. You know what I mean? Everybody runs around talking about democratic governments and stuff, and they don't realize that that's not the same as what's being talked about when it comes to constitutional governments. Okay, constitutional governments
mm.
are set up
But Rome
according.
was an empire, right?
That what'd you say?
Rome was an empire. It was
Right.
like it wasn't
There
a
were
republic necessarily, was it?
there was periods. There were at least two periods. Republic
yeah,
in Rome, I think.
and a lot of the philosophers freaking promoted a republic. They wanted it to go back to a republic where it wasn't ran by any empire or any Caesar or emperor or anything like that. So it was common in the ancient world for Greece and Rome to talk about these things, and that's kind of
Well,
where
Plato wrote a book called The Republic, right?
that's what it was about.
In 370 BC.
Everything in that book promoted a republic. I mean, that's what he was referring to, and that's kind of one of.
Also,
Oh, go ahead.
there's another point that you've got to consider. To be a citizen of a republic, to have rights in or in any sort of governmental system, political system, you need to be recognised as a citizen. So slaves are not recognised as citizens.
Now, that's
Who
another.
who is not recognized as citizen?
The slaves.
If we're talking about ancient Rome, slaves would not be or ancient Greece,
That's right.
slaves would not be recognised as citizens.
Now,
Yeah.
that's another thing that I wanted to bring up too about when you hear about democracies. Greek Greece was a democracy supposedly, okay, but nobody realizes that 3/4 of their freaking population were all consisted of slaves, okay, and freaking to become a citizen for a person who wasn't freaking a noble or a rich person or whatever the term was they used, a poor person had to freaking join the military and become a part of the military. In order to become a citizen, they had to become a freaking a part of the military, and that is where the draft and joining the army and everything and being drafted into the army came from as well. Okay, so
As a good example of this, to bring it into more modern culture, sort of, the film and book Starship Troopers
right.
reflects on this point quite a lot.
Yes, that's a perfect example of it. Though this is not a sci-fi movie channel, and we do not support. Well, I kind of watch sci-fi movies, and I think Starship Troopers is cool as shit. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is this stuff goes all the way back into the galactic history stuff, and can I quickly mention it?
Go for it. I know you want to. You've been on here. You've been on here 5 minutes. I guarantee you want to.
I've been biting my tongue.
Go ahead.
So take it with a pinch of salt, but do your own investigation on this. There are those that believe that this planet, the so-called ancient gods of Rome and Greece and wherever in the world, any of these sky gods were actually extraterrestrials. And these extraterrestrials came here long ago to set up like their own outposts for their empire, which stretches not just on Earth but beyond Earth into the galaxy, right? And these galactic empires, we have sort of just got tiny little reincarnations or little mimics of them, and that's what they refer to as the demigods and so on Earth. And I think that's it's important for us to realize this type of concept, because we as a species, humans, are now starting to realize that there is such a thing as life out there, and our real place in the universe. And only when we come to grips with this will we start to take responsibility for our own thoughts and actions and become sovereign gods ourselves. Because before that, we've had to rely on others to understand this knowledge for us and interpret it, like shamans and priests and stuff like this. But now we've come into the age of knowledge where we actually all have access to this information, and we are able to take self-responsibility rather than waiting for some kind of savior. And I think now is the time that we could actually break down boundaries between people, have respect for each other, love each other, and create societies, new types of societies that are governed by rules, decentralized rules, rather than centralized power. Anyway, that's my rant.
Two points on that. First of all, the outside alien, let's call it, influence is still a theoretical concept. There's no actual physical proof as far as we know of any external influences existing. And also, I think the lithium movements, the Reformation, the changing of the Bible from Latinized or Latin to English has actually influenced the gaining of the general populace gaining of knowledge.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That is true. And one thing I wanted to mention too is it's like up on my freaking talking points. The first thing I said was natural law in philosophy is a system of right or justice held to be common to all humans, and it derived from nature rather than from the rules of society or positive laws. You know what I mean? Now, I have to go over positive laws a little bit more before I start getting more into that because it's been a while since I've dove into a lot of this stuff. But the state of nature is a state of society with free and equal men. Okay, already observing the natural law, and that's supposed to be from Hobbes. He believes that. He believes that, okay? And then you have John Locke with the social contract. Now, the thing that
another name you that is important here, and which argues for the natural law argument is Adam Smith.
Yeah.
You talk about John Locke, John Locke, Adam Smith would be his contemporary sort of opposer.
Adam Smith is also one of the people that contributed a lot to the American Constitution too, wasn't he?
So, I believe so. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the French Constitution, which is
Well, I know Rousseau pretty much ran amok on that whole thing. Like, freaking, he was really overpowering when it came to the French Constitution and like how much influence went into it. You know what I mean? I know Rousseau was a big deal when it came to that. Montesquieu, I kind of understand where he's coming from too, because like freaking the mob rule is probably one of the biggest things that they were worried about when it came to handing all of these rights over to the citizens instead of freaking instead of a monarchy running the show. You know what I mean? I can see that, but the thing that I really oh, he's got the thing that okay.
Sorry, keep going.
The thing that I didn't have, or I didn't agree with about the whole thing, and don't get me wrong, I think constitutional law is probably the closest we've gotten so far, but the thing that I don't like the most is frickin' having a social contract. I don't like the idea that I'm born into this world, and because I'm born in a certain place, I'm obligated to be a citizen of that frickin' region because a government tells me so. And then when I become a citizen, that means I'm obligated to pay them money because of I'm breathing and walking the planet and doing what a human being naturally is supposed to do. I think that's
idealistically, I agree with you. You know, I feel the same way. I consider myself an earthling, not a person of any country particular. Like, I travel around the world quite a lot. I love everywhere, but
but you still have to apply.
I also see the difficulty in what the US is going through right now. For example, with the border crisis, all these illegal immigrants coming in. But you could turn a negative into a positive. Like maybe this could be a good thing. As long as it leads to more freedom and more like movement, natural movement of people. People will end up where they want to be,
I
which
I
could
have
be
a
a good
problem with
thing.
this because I believe um, as a British citizen and a member of a country that's just technically left the European Union, I believe in sovereignty. I believe in borders. And There's an issue of cultural displacement here. Um, each country has history,
Well, that's
has
true.
their own culture, has their own traditions, and by creating this sort of let's call it one world order sort of concept, you remove those traditions, remove those cultures, and create a sort of amalgamation of a singular culture.
Well, see that
Yeah,
that's
I
all.
agree. There is a lot to be said for preserving the cultures that were there, and letting them sort of take the front seat in like determining how their country evolves, and
Mm.
just letting a whole bunch of people in and displacing the people who were there, kind of like Israel's doing to Gaza, or
Oh,
white people did in
yeah, that's
Africa
an
or
argument. That's an
wherever.
argument. Argument.
It causes a lot of pain and trauma when it happens too quickly, for sure. So
Mhm.
yeah, I can see both sides of that coin.
And you got to understand what you're talking about there, Mark, is like freaking the culmination of all this garbage that we've been having in this country, in every country, for the last freaking
Mm.
almost 100 years. Okay, since freaking socialism has freaking started taking root. And the thing of it is like you got to also realize there were borders, there were countries, and there were people taking care of their own citizens before any constitutional law was ever freaking thought of. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
the
Mm.
borders and freaking taking care of your own citizens and worrying about that freaking would still freaking be around without all of these freaking regulations telling me that I have to freaking become a citizen of that region. Okay, like
It's just tribalism on a larger scale, isn't it?
yeah.
Like it's natural for people to put a fence around to try and contain and control what's happening inside their environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just see countries as like an extension of that. But
Certain
I do
level.
see problems when it gets too centralized. The people have so little say that they become unhappy. So
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the
and
more
then you need
decentralized it
the
is, the more
idea
localized it is, the
also.
better it seems to be. Which is like the idea of a republic, right? That the people can make local decisions by getting
Even in the
together.
even in the monarch system, there's still democracy. As an example, in the UK, the monarch can only sign into legislation. So they don't create the legislation. That's still done by governmental officials, um, ministers, MPs, members of parliament, which are elected by people.
Well,
So
you know,
the members of parliament are the direct representatives of the people.
but Mark, you know that you guys have all been hoodwinked, right? Like you know what the freaking king
I do.
really is, right? You know what the king really
Obviously,
is.
there is an issue.
He's
Obviously, there's an issue with UK with a lot of politics at the moment because of
no, I
the
mean
sort of
I'm just talking
there is
about
two
England.
states. Listen,
I'm just talking about England, okay? You know what the King of England really is, right? He's freaking the president who doesn't have terms. That's it. Like he doesn't step down and somebody takes his
Basically, a
place.
dictator.
You know what I'm saying? His
It's
basic
the only
responsibilities,
person with power.
everything
he can
you
suggest
And
legislation. That's
the
the
trick
question.
is they give us the illusion of power while actually maintaining the true legislative power, right? That's what a sovereign in a monarchy is. It delegates the reign of a country so that they don't have to overtly rule a country. Okay, now this is kind of how the Roman Empire collapsed into the Holy Roman Empire so that they could passively rule the people. And yeah, it's a massive hoodwink, and it's back to slavery through these mechanisms, and
I'm not
I
so
think
sure that I can agree with that
it's
point
like
because,
you can agree
again,
though that today we live in a world of modern day slavery. Like all the money is debt, and we're debt slaves to our governments, to our monarchies, and it's just these hierarchical power structures that we have very little influence in and under, and decreasingly so because of all the control mechanisms, censorship, and imprisonment, and all this stuff that they're trying to do to the average person that's like
but,
blatantly happening now,
but,
including
but,
imprisoning journalists and stuff like this. You know,
in certain countries, let me on that one because that's not fair. You don't see imprisonment of journalists in the US or the UK or
but you also
anyone,
don't see
I would
them.
say
Well,
any westernized, but
Julian
majority
Assange is
westernized
imprisoned
countries.
in UK right now. Edward Snowden has been kicked out of the US, or he can't go back to the US without getting imprisoned. This
Yeah,
stuff
but
happens all the time. Just the other day, another US journalist was killed in Ukraine. The US did nothing, and continues to say
the US cannot. The US cannot do anything because if the US
it's
enters
not spending money.
Ukraine officially, then it's a NATO issue.
Pressure on them.
yeah, well,
You could put political pressure on them, but they don't.
the
Because they're saying things that are inconvenient to the power structure. And you can see the power structure isn't designed for the people, it's designed for the political class and the elite class. And everyone's starting to see that now.
I disagree with that point. I completely disagree with the point. Again, monarchs in those westernized countries that do have monarchs, the monarchs generally do not have any sort of direct power over the people.
But just because they don't have direct power
the
doesn't mean
governments
they
are
don't have
elected.
power. Look at
The
their wealth,
governments
for
are
example.
elected by the people. So
Monarchs
in
aren't
effect,
elected by the
we
people.
create.
No,
No,
see-
the governments are though.
But the monarchs are
we-
funded by the people.
we take
You
this
know?
back. We take this back to what we were talking about before when it comes to freaking statutory laws and civil laws. Okay, you look at all these people who freaking were once of noble standing, but now they're insanely rich. And it also was brought up in our last episode about these trust funds. Okay. Now you have freaking people in this world, man, who freaking went from being dukes, being freaking earls, being all of these nobles, to being what they call aristocrats now. Okay, and they have immense money and immense power. And what they did is they created these trust funds. Okay, there's billionaires right now living off the freaking back of freaking the fortune that their freaking grandparents and great grandparents had, and have never had to worry about a thing a day in their lives. Okay, ever. And their families have gone back fucking thousands of years because of it. You know what I'm saying? And these people do exist. I don't want to say that there's one overlord trying to take over the world and trying to dominate, you know what I'm saying? But I can tell you that there are freaking people that are rich and powerful and live like this.
Yeah, but
Absolutely, that's clear as day.
why
And they tend
shouldn't
to work
somebody
together.
receive why shouldn't somebody receive an inheritance from their parents or grandparents? What
I think there
what's the
should be
alternative? Give
regulation.
the entire inheritance to the state?
Well, that's the
Because,
thing.
Mark, if someone beats the game, then everyone loses except them, right? If someone amasses all the
Mhm.
wealth and power on the planet and no one else has it, then everyone 99% of people lose, 1% wins. That is not a beneficial outcome to all of humanity. And that's why I think the 99% should make sure that there are checks and balances that prevents the winning of the game. We don't it's not a that is not a good outcome for any of us if anyone gets too rich and powerful. So I think, like, because there is a finite amount of resources on this planet, we need to make sure that it's a fair game all the time and no one wins it, because this is what happens. Empires and power structures just get too out of control, too power hungry, and everyone ends up losing their freedom.
And who decides this concept of everybody wins or everybody doesn't lose?
And
That's a good
also,
question. That's a good question. Because,
I,
like,
I
right now, as it stands, the United Nations and the World Health Organization and these people are totally corrupted by these powerful elite
okay,
people.
and
So
now
we
hold up.
need a
Let
new
me
way
let me
of
also,
coming
Mr. Robot. Let me also add something in on what you just said there too. Okay, now like these powerful elites, don't get me wrong, they are there, but I can even go further and say that everything you said right there sounded just and it sounded good and all that stuff. But everything you said right there is at this moment being manipulated and used the same way as what freaking the these elitist rich not 1% freaking people who are billionaires and getting inheritances are doing. Okay, you have one side who's
I
trying to
totally
do,
agree.
you know what I mean? So any way you look at it, it's coming from both directions, you know what I'm saying? Like even the stuff.
Absolutely. And I mean, look at Davos right now. They claim it's like, oh, it's the world government coming together, but who actually elected any of those bastards? No one.
Exactly.
It's just really rich people coming together. You know what I mean? So we
Well, you
have to
still
be
get
very.
MPs, you still get members of parliament, you still get politicians entering Davos, which ended a
I,
couple days
I
ago.
don't
Oh,
trust
yeah.
any electoral process unless there is a good way for the people to audit that system, which none of us have right now. So, what I think the U.S. election has shown to the world is how corrupt these electoral processes have been, and likely have been for a long time, and will continue to get increasingly more corrupt as AI is able to influence people as they pass these new internet censorship laws. But they always frame it like they want to protect us from the internet, when really stuff like the Twitter papers shows us like, no, the intelligence agencies censor true information
There,
because it's
there is a
inconvenient to power structure, right?
there is
So
a problem with your argument there. You're looking at this from mainly a US perspective.
no, I'm
Remember,
not. We've got
there
the
are
same laws
plenty of
being
other
passed in
countries.
the UK and in Australia right now. Like what do they call them?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well,
The yeah,
it's like it's like is it like bullying laws? I can't remember, but
well,
it's like it basically amounts to internet censorship, right?
yeah,
And so,
the
like,
internet
I'm saying this is a global
safety law in
phenomenon
this country.
because there,
Mm.
I'm saying there already is a global government. We're just not aware of it. Okay, and it happens in these places like the Bilderbergs, the World Economic Forum, these types of
Well, do you
massive,
think
massively
do you
powerful.
think UNICEF is a good organization?
I don't know enough about it to make a comment. I know they've had some scandals in the past, but I don't know
Yeah,
enough about
yeah.
their power. I'm
You know,
saying we need to decentralize rather than centralize. Whenever there's centralization,
exactly.
it doesn't matter if it starts out good, it will end up corrupt because powerful psychopaths will work their way in there to control as many people with as little effort as possible, right?
When
So
you
I'm
say
proposing there's an
decentralization,
alternative to
what sort of scale are you talking about? Are you talking about on a national level? Are you talking on
I'm talking about every
a
single
state and
level you can
county?
conceive of, even on the corporate level, even on the spiritual level, even on the country level. Every level, there are hierarchical systems, right? And whenever a
Yeah.
hierarchical system influences enough people, powerful people will try and come in and manipulate it. That's what I'm saying. It's just in their interest. I would do it too, probably, if I was in that position, you know? So, what I'm saying is there's alternatives to that. Through technology, we can now create things that interconnects everyone, allows us to verify voting systems through blockchain technology. There's ways that we can get rid of the banking
Yeah.
system
Well, I
without
mean,
CBDCs. We can use
see,
completely open source cryptocurrencies, for example, and we can create new ways to become less reliant on the systems of control they have imposed on us.
see,
And I totally agree with you, Roger.
with me, like there's a lot of things that are inconsistent with the way things are going today, and like you're talking about, like all these people arguing and bitching on TV about politics and all that, right? Which I agree, that's some horrible stuff. But the thing is
Again, that's
like
just entertainment at the end of the day.
the
Yeah, I think
process
so too.
the process of constitutional government is not freaking a fast and speedy process, okay? And it was never meant to be that way. Now, I think the problem with a lot of these issues is the fact that everybody wants what they want when they want it, okay? Now, whenever freaking something that is supposed to be passed into law goes into Congress, it's supposed to be reviewed by Congress and the House of Representatives, and then it's supposed to freaking go into the Senate.
Yeah.
Okay, and in England that would be the lower house and of Parliament, right? And then the higher
Yeah,
house.
the House of Commons and House of Lords. Yeah.
Now these processes take a long time. These are procedures. Sometimes frickin' it would take years for it to get done. Sometimes it doesn't pass and it's held over to the side and reviewed later. Now, there's a good reason for that, and the forefather or founding fathers here in the United States frickin' set it up because they frickin' wanted these laws to frickin' be frickin' reviewed, and they didn't want them to just get passed. You know what I'm saying? Now, that's something
In
that
some cases, laws are passed extremely quickly, and as we've seen with the various sort of internet censorship legislation, they are extremely poorly worded or vaguely worded.
Mm-hmm.
So, as an example, the definition of hate speech. Can anybody actually physically define what is hate speech?
Right. Exactly.
Well, that's why I think it's important. Like I've got up on the screen here, it's important to have platforms on which we can have coherent debates internationally, so that we can come to agreements and easily view these topics and see the pros and cons and rate them ourselves, contribute to them ourselves. And only through discussion, I believe, and free speech can we come to conclusions on these things, rather than censorship, rather than shadow banning and all this. I think we should come together openly and honestly and, discuss the tough topics.
And I'll tell you something else that I disagree with. And What I disagree with is the Senate. Okay, I think the worst thing the United States ever did was created the Senate. And I'll tell you why. Because freaking before the Senate was created, and the Department of Justice too, I'm against that too. But I can get to that later. Let me explain something about the Senate though, okay? Before the Senate was freaking involved, freaking the House of Representatives met together in Washington, and then they freaking created the bills. But instead of them passing it, they had to take it back to each of the states, and the states had to review freaking what was being said in those bills, and they had to approve it or turn it down. In order to freaking make it more speedier and expedite the freaking law, according to the United States government, they created the Senate so that freaking these politicians could stay up there in Washington, D.C. and make all these laws and didn't have to refer anything back to the states. You see what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense. I think the same thing has happened in Australia, actually. Because these people, it's like a centralization of power again, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But again, those politicians are elected by the people. They are the direct representatives of the people. So it's not a sort of
assuming that there's no corruption
vacuum.
And
There's no vacuum. There's no over large vacuum. These politicians are put into power by the people within elections. And if somebody disagrees with a politician or a part point of view, they do not vote. Generally speaking, do not vote for that politician or party.
I understand where you're coming from there, Mark, but my point is the fact that they don't even have to freaking come back to their state and freaking discuss the laws with the state anymore. Okay? I mean, period. It's just not there. Freaking, they got a Senate. Okay? It goes from the House to the Senate, and the state's not even freaking brought into the equation. It's gone. So now they make all the decisions in Washington, D.C., and the states are freaking separate. You see, they're distanced it.
Why?
Yeah, but those laws are still voted on by politicians.
In Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they are still politicians that are elected by the people.
It's.
Roger, do you get a chance to elect senators, or who elects senators in the U.S.?
We elect senators. We elect House representatives.
You as an individual, you get a voting
yes.
opportunity for that?
Yes.
Okay.
But my whole thing is I believe that it would be more freaking it would be a better thing for freaking the individual citizen if the House of Representatives in our state decided on these federal laws that were being put in place instead of the Senate. Okay. I don't think that.
In a roundabout way, they do. In a roundabout way, they do.
They take care of their state laws.
Politicians controlled by the people or elected by the people. So, in a sort of roundabout way, what you're saying is correct. Is
17th Amendment.
What's happening?
See the
So there was a lot of corruption in the Senate before the 17th Amendment was passed, and in 1912 they came together and what does the 17th Amendment say? Is that so the people can vote on the Senate?
Yeah, the people.
So how do you think that the Senate is corrupted today?
The Senate was in the first place it was created to separate the freaking power of state from federal. Okay, it was to freaking make a distance. Okay, government's first goal is to separate the individual from the freaking federal government. Okay, they don't really want us running our mouth and frickin' saying what we feel, like all this stuff. They don't want to hear that. We complicate things. They want to be able to expedite things and get it going, and everything has to work out. Now, what happens is this piece of shit, frickin' blah blah blah, Joe Blow, sitting over here in the corner running his mouth, and he's complicating the shit out of him. So we got to get rid of him. He's complicating things. We could get this done if frickin' he wasn't here, and that's what's going on there. Okay, so first they get rid of the frickin' they make it harder for the individual to frickin' be a part of the federal government. Then they separate frickin' the state. Then they turn around and they frickin' go in and they frickin' separate the judicial from the frickin' executive by creating the frickin' Department of Justice, which emulates frickin' the Supreme Court. Okay, it's a frickin' exact duplicate, and the reason why they did that is because they frickin' separated the judicial from the executive a little bit farther, so that frickin' they didn't have to deal with frickin' the Supreme Court every time.
But it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. To allow judiciary to actually act as a check and balance.
There's no check and
So if
balance.
you've got a, let's say,
There's no check and balance with the
let's say you've
Department
got
of
a corrupt
Justice.
or a corrupt politician, the justice system can review that without further influence from that politician or that party.
See, their big argument is there is no evidence that the judiciary ever had review. Okay, but because it was never mentioned in the Constitution. But they freaking turn around, and that's what their justification was for the Department of Justice, was to freaking review freaking the executive branch, okay, and things of that nature. Well, the freaking executive branch is the one who creates or who enforces the laws, okay? They don't interpret the law. That's what the freaking judiciary.
No, that's what the courts are. Yeah, that's what
Right, okay.
courts are there for.
So, freaking the Department of Justice is sitting there freaking doing the job of the judiciary. Okay, and there's no checks and balance there. There's freaking the executive branch, which the Department of Justice is a part of. Okay, it's part of the executive. It's not a part of the judiciary. They emulate the judiciary so that freaking they can take the place of the Supreme Court without having to freaking have the Supreme Court freaking go through and say this is unconstitutional. This is unconstitutional. You can't do this. You see what I mean? Because that's the executive. That's what the executive branch doesn't want. They don't want the Supreme Court coming in and saying that's unconstitutional. You can't do it. You see? That's.
But there is another issue here. I'm looking at this from a European point of view, where you've got things like an outside body such as the European Court of Human Rights, overruling sovereign laws.
Yeah. See, when people start overruling sovereignty, that's when you really need to stop and think about that. That's not good. Okay. I mean, that right there that's some crazy shit. Because, like I said, I mean,
absolutely,
and there is another thing that you've got to consider. In UK and most of Europe, elections, you vote in a party. In the US, sort of concept, you're more voting for a person.
I'd rather
than a
do
party.
that. I'd rather.
Yeah, same in Australia.
I'd rather vote for a person rather than a party, and I wish that was the case, but freaking it's not. And later on, if you guys want to, we can go over that and kind of discuss it because
Actually, I would argue the opposite. I would actually argue the opposite, but yeah.
I oppose
Yeah, I don't
parties.
know. I'm on the fence with that one because a person is easy to corrupt, but like a party, I don't know. Like there's a lot more like checks and balances, I guess, but it needs to be more transparent, in my opinion. Because what we have in Australia is sometimes the person that we elect is taken out of power by the party that we didn't, we didn't elect all the people in the party, right?
Right.
So
technically, isn't in Australia the same sort of concept as in Europe? You elect a party rather than a person.
well, yeah, technically
In theory.
the party elects the leader, and we elect the party. All right, but when they're running for office, they put the leader forwards that they said they're gonna have. All right, so everyone votes on that premise, but then they replace that person after they're elected, and I think that's unfair because that removes so much power from the people. We get given these mirages of what's going to happen, but then it doesn't. And I think two-party politics is a crazy psyop anyway. Like we all have it, right? US has it, Britain has it, Australia has it, but it just never seems to make major changes that we need, you know?
Let's put a pause on this until the next episode. We're at an hour and 5 minutes. I think we brought up some good stuff, so especially
one last thing I just want to mention.
Well, hold up, let me say something. I was getting ready to say something to you. We came up with a good stuff here, and I think you need to come back next week, and we need to finish up on some of this conversation. Okay, so try to make it on here. Okay.
I'd love to.
Okay, now go ahead and say what you wanted to say.
I just noticed that recently, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a US president is not meant to be able to start a war and do a war. It's meant to go through congressional, voting first, right? Mm-hmm. But then Biden decided to go bomb Yemen, and it didn't seem like it went through the Congress. So, like, who's meant to police the president in that situation?
This is where we can discuss that with, it's called plenary powers, and I have issues against that too, and this is something we can bring up too, because I think that's important. I actually brought it up in a couple of previous episodes with Mark, but I think we should talk about that as well. I'll actually explain a little bit more of that, go through and review it in the next episode for you, so if you show up, we can do this.
Okay, sounds good. That could be a good thing for next time. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you for showing up, Mr. Robot, and thank you for being here, Mark. This has been great.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you guys were here, and I'll talk to you later.
Will do.
All the best. Love ya.
Later.